Hello everyone, welcome back. So in the previous video, we had finished the cloud storage service for our application, and we now have the ability to actually upload a user image to cloud. So now what we're going to do in this video is that we are going to finally work towards finalizing all of the registration logic for our application. So without anything further to do, let's get into it. So the way we're going to start is that we are going to go to our auth provider, and then we are going to create the function that is going to be responsible for actually allowing us to create a user inside of Firebase. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a new function. I'll call this function register user, and be sure to create this function before we do anything else. So let's get going. And this function would be register user with email and password. And then what we would get for this function is going to be the email for our user. So we'll get a email for our user. We'll also get a password for our user, so the password that the user wants for him to be set in the database. The next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to pass in a function. And this function is going to be a future of type void, and we'll call this function on success. So if this function is successful, what do we want to do? And this function is going to be passed in the UID of the user that was just created. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to open the function body, and I'll also mark this function as asynchronous because we are just going to perform some asynchronous operations inside of our function. Okay, so now that we have this, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to do Alt-Shift-F just to reformat the code, and then do command save. So now that we have the app actually reloaded, what we can do is start defining the logic inside of our function. So first thing first, what we're going to do is that we're going to set the status of our auth provider to auth status.authenticating. Once we have that, we'll notify all of the listeners. Then we're going to open up a try block, and we are going to perform the actual part of creating the user inside here. So I'll create an auth result variable, which will store the result of our user creation function, user creation task. And what we'll do is that we'll access the auth instance or the Firebase authentication instance. And then inside of here, we'll have a function would be create user with email and password. We'll pass in the email for the user, and we'll pass in the password for the user. Once we have that, what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to end this statement, and I'm going to await for this function to complete, since this function does return a future of type auth result. So once we have the result, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to set our user to our result.user, and this is the user that we have inside of our auth provider, so this variable. And once we have access to our user, the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to set our status to status or auth status dot not authenticating, but actually authenticated. Once we have that, I'm going to await for our on success function, which gets passed in to be called. So any functions that we want to perform once our user is actually created inside of the authentication module of Firebase, and we want to actually now save the user's data inside of our Firestore database, what we can do is that we can do that inside of our onSuccess function, and this onSuccess function would get passed in the UID of our user. So we'll wait for this onSuccess function to complete, and this is the function that gets passed in. Once we have that, what we're going to do is that we are going to go back to our login page. So I'll do navigation service, and we have to import our navigation service, which IntelliSense already did for me, but all you would have to do is to import /services/navigation service.dart and do command save. So for now, what we can do is that we can do navigation service.instance.goback. So we want to go back to our login page, and then for there we would move to another page, but we would have navigation service.instance.goback, and then after this I would have a comment here saying navigate to, and then navigate to home page, which we haven't created yet. So just for keeping track of stuff, I'll just put the comment here. Okay, so now that we have that, the next thing I'm going to do is that I am going to also inside of our application display a snack bar to show that, oh, the user was successfully registered. So all we would do for that is that after our onSuccess function, I am going to copy this line of code, which is inside of our login user with email and password function. I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to just do welcome and then user.email, just to like give them a feedback as to, yes, you were successfully registered. And once we have this, we are going to go back, and then we'll have some code here which will navigate us to the home page. And then after we have this, we are now going to address the logic inside of our catch block. So if in any of these steps we encounter an error, then the code inside of the catch block is going to be rendered. And all we'll do is that we'll set the status equals to auth status.error, and then we'll set the user equals to null, because we don't want a reference to the user. And then what I'm going to do is that I am going to show the snack bar for error authenticating. So just paste this in here, and it will show snack bar error for we had an error authenticating or error registering user. And then once we have this, the final step that we would do is that after our catch block, we would, or after all of this function executes, we are going to notify all of the listeners again as to a change inside of our auth provider. And I'm going to do command save. So now we have that. The one final thing that we would have to do is that once our user actually logs into our application or registers a new account with our application, we would like to update their last seen time, which we had stored inside of Firebase. So if I bring the Firebase console in, and let me just go to the Firebase project. So I'll bring up the Firebase database, Firestore database in. So we would like to update this every time the user actually got created, or every time the user actually gets logged in. We would like to update the last seen time. So for this, all we would have to do is, for now, that I'll leave a comment here saying update last seen time. And it'll become more apparent later on in the videos as to why we need this last seen time. And then on top, also after the status and success, we'll have the update last seen time, and we can do command save. Okay, so with that, we have successfully completed our register user with email and password function. And now what we're going to do is that we're going to go back to our registration page, and we are actually going to link up our auth provider to our registration page. So all we would have to do for that would be the process similar to our login page, where firstly we would import the provider package. Then once we have the provider package, the next thing we're going to do is that we are going to go to the function which is responsible for generating our registration page UI, the build function, in which we have the function being called that is responsible for generating our registration page UI. And then what we're going to do is that we are going to wrap our registration page UI inside of a change notifier provider. And then this change notifier provider is going to be of type auth provider. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use the value constructor for this. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to import the auth provider class, which I think Flutter already, or IntelliSense already did for us. But I'm just going to remove this import statement. And then I'm going to do is that I'm going to import it myself by doing import / providers and auth provider. And then I'm going to go down to our change notifier provider. And then for the value, we are going to set the auth provider.instance. And then for the child of this change notifier provider, we'll have the registration page UI. And then we are going to do command save. So once we have this, we have officially linked the auth provider to our registration page, but now we have to actually get the auth provider so that we can access it, or we have to get a reference to our auth provider. So for that, what we're going to do is that inside of our registration page UI, we're going to wrap the main container function inside of a builder widget. This builder widget will then give us a function which would give us access to a build context which we require. And then we are going to return inside of here the actual container that was already being returned. And then I'm just going to do Alt-Shift-F and Command Save to just see that we get no errors. And then inside of here, what I'm going to do is that I am going to get access to our auth provider. But before we do that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to create a variable that is going to have, or that is going to contain a reference to our auth provider. And then once we have that, I'm going to go back to our registration page UIs and then the builder function. And then I'm going to set the auth variable that we just created to get provider of, and then the type would be auth provider from the context. And the context that we have is the context that gets passed in by the builder. And then we can do Command Save. So with that, we have access to the actual auth provider. And now I'm going to split this video in two parts. And now in the next video, what we're going to do is that we're going to link up all of the logic from the different services that we have. And we're going to actually get the registration button actually working. So with that, I'm going to end this video here. I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Peace.